Livy from the foundation of the city. Whether the task I have undertaken of writing a complete history of the Roman people from the very commencement of its existence will reward me for the labor spent on it, I neither know for certain, nor if I did know, would I venture to say. For I see that this is an old established and a common practice, each fresh writer being invariably persuaded that he will either attain great certainty in the materials of his narrative, or suppress the rudeness of antiquity in the excellence of his style. However this may be, it will still be a great satisfaction to me to have taken my part too in investing to the utmost of my abilities the annals of the foremost nation in the world with a deeper interest. And if in such a crowd of writers my own reputation is thrown into the shade, I would console myself with the renown and greatest of those who eclipse my fame. The subject, moreover, is one that demands immense labor. It goes back beyond 700 years, after starting from small and humble beginnings, has grown to such dimensions that it begins to be overburdened by its greatness. I have very little doubt, too, that for the majority of my readers, the earliest times and those immediately succeeding will possess little attraction. They will hurry on to those modern days in which the might of a long paramount nation is wasting by internal decay. I, on the other hand, shall look for a further reward of my labors in being able to close my eyes to the evils which our generation has witnessed for so many years, so long at least as I am devoting all my thoughts to retracting those pristine records free from all the anxiety which can disturb the historian of his own times, even if it cannot warp him from the truth. The traditions of what happened prior to the foundation of the city or whilst it was being built are more fitted to adorn the creations of the poet than the authentic records of the historian, and I have no intention of establishing either their truth or their falsehood. This much license is conceded to the ancients, that by intermingling human actions with divine, they may confer a more august dignity on the origins of states. Now, if any nation ought to be allowed to claim a sacred origin and point back to a divine paternity, that nation is Rome. For such is her renown in war, that when she chooses to represent Mars as her own and her founder's father, the nations of the world accept the statement with the same equanimity with which they accept her dominion. But whatever opinions may be formed or criticisms passed up upon these and similar traditions, I regard them as of small importance. The subject to which I would ask each of my readers to devote his earnest attention are these: the life and morals of the community, the men and the qualities by which, through domestic policy and foreign war, dominion was won and extended. Then, as the standard of morality gradually lowers, let them follow the decay of the national character, observing how at first it slowly sinks, then slips downward more and more rapidly, and finally begins to plunge into headlong ruin until he reaches these days in which we can bear neither our diseases nor their remedies. There is this exceptionally beneficial and fruitful advantage to be derived from the study of the past, that you see, set in the clear light of historical truth, examples of every possible type. From these you may select for yourself and your country what to imitate, and also what, as being mischievous, is in its inception and disastrous in its issues, you are to avoid, unless, however, I am misled by affection for my undertaking. There has never existed any commonwealth greater in power with a pure morality, or more fertile in good examples, or any state in which avarice and luxury have been so late in making their inroads. or poverty and frugality so highly and continuously honored, showing so clearly that the less wealth men possessed, the less they coveted. In these latter years, wealth has brought avarice in its train, and the unlimited command of pleasure has created in men a passion for ruining themselves and everything else through self indulgence and licentiousness. But criticisms which we will be unwelcome, even when perhaps necessary, must not appear in the commencements at all events of this extensive work. We should much prefer to start with favorable omens, and if we could have adopted the poet's custom, it would have been much pleasanter to commence with prayers and supplication to God and goddesses that they would grant a favorable and successful issue to the great task before us. Book 1: The Earliest Legends. To begin with, it is generally admitted that after the capture of Troy, whilst the rest of the Trojans were massacred, against two of them, Aeneas and Antenor, the Achivi, refused to exercise the rights of war, partly owing to old ties of hospitality and partly because these men had always been in favor of making peace and surrendering Helen. Their subsequent fortunes were different. Antenor sailed into the furthest part of the Adriatic, accompanied by a number of Aenicians who had been driven from Paphlagonia by a revolution, and after losing their king Paplimenes before Troy, were looking for a settlement and a leader. The combined force of Aenicians and Trojans defeated the Euganiae, who dwelt between the sea and the Alps and occupied their land. The place where they disembarked was called Troy, and the name was extended to the surrounding district. The whole nation were called Veneti. Similar misfortunes led to Aeneas becoming a wanderer, but the fates were preparing a higher destiny for him. He first visited Macedonia, then was carried down to Sicily in quest of a settlement. From Sicily, he directed his course to the Laurentian territory. Here, too, the name of Troy is found, and here the Trojans disembarked, and as their almost infinite wanderings had left them nothing but their arms and their ships, they began to plunder the neighborhood. The Aborigines who occupied the country were their king Latinus at their head, with their king Latinus at their head, came hastily together from the city and the country districts to repel the inroads of the strangers by force or arms. From this point, there is a twofold tradition. According to the one, Latinus was defeated in battle and made peace with Aeneas, and subsequently a family alliance. According to the other, whilst the two armies were standing ready to engage and waiting for the signal, Latinus advanced in front of his lines and invited the leader of the strangers to a conference. He inquired of him what manner of men they were, whence they came, what had happened to make them leave their homes, what were they in quest of when they landed in Latinus's territory. When he heard that the men were Trojans, that their leader was Aeneas, the son of Anchises and Venus, that their city had been burned, and that the homeless exiles were now looking for a place to settle in and build a city, he was so struck with the noble bearing of the men and their leader, and their readiness to accept alike either peace or war, that he gave his right hand as a solemn pledge of friendship for the future. A formal treaty was made between the leaders and mutual agreement, greetings exchanged between the armies. Latinus received Aeneas as a guest in his house, and there, in the presence of his tutelary deities, completed the political alliance by a domestic one, and give his daughter in marriage to Aeneas. This incident confirmed the Trojans in the hope that they had reached the term of their wanderings and won a permanent home. They built a town with Aeneas called Lavinium after his wife. In a short time, a boy was born of the new marriage, to whom his parents gave the name of Ascanius. In a short time, the Aborigines and Trojans became involved in war with Turnus, the king of the Rutilians. Lavinia had been betrothed to him before the arrival of Aeneas, and furious at the finding a stranger preferred of him to him, he declared war against both Latinus and Aeneas. Neither side could congratulate themselves on the result of the battle. The Rutilians were defeated, but the victorious Aborigines and Trojans lost their leader, Latinus. Feeling their need of allies, Turnus and the Rutilians had recourse to the celebrated power of the Etruscans and Mezentius, their king, who was reigning at Caere, a wealthy city in those days. From the first, he had felt anything but pleasure at the rise of the new city, and now he regarded the growth of the Trojan state as much too rapid to be safe to its neighbors. So he welcomed the proposal to join forces with the Rutilians to keep the Aborigines from abandoning him in the face of this strong coalition, and to secure their being not only under the same laws but also the same destination. Aeneas called both nations by the common name of Latins. From that time, the Aborigines were not behind the Trojans in their loyal devotion to Aeneas. So great was the power of Eutria that the renown of her people had filled not only the inland parts of Italy, but also the coastal districts along the whole length of the land from the Alps to the Straits of Messina. Aeneas, however, trusting to the loyalty of the two nations, who were day by day growing into one, led his forces into the field instead of awaiting the enemy behind his walls. The battle resulted in favor of the Latins, but it was the last mortal act of Aeneas. His tomb, whatever it is lawful and right to call him, is situated on the bank of the Numicus. He is addressed as Jupiter Indiges. His son Ascanius was not old enough to assume the government, but his throne remained secure throughout his minority. During that interval, such was Lavinia's force of character, though a woman was regent, the Latin state and the kingdom of his father and grandfather were preserved unimpaired for her son. I will not discuss the question, for who could speak decisively about a matter of such extreme antiquity, whether the man whom the Julian house claimed under the name of Lullus as name of their the founder of their name was this Ascanius, or an older one than he, born of Crusa, whilst Ilium was still intact, and after its fall a sharer in the father's fortune. This Ascanius, wherever born, or of whatever mother, it is generally agreed in any case that he was the son of Aeneas, left to his mother or his stepmother the city of Lavinium, which was for those days a prosperous and wealthy city, with a superabundant population, and built anew at the foot of the Alban Hills, which from its position stretching along the side of the hill was called Alban Longa. An interval of 30 years elapsed between the foundation of Lavinia and the colonization of Alba Longa. Such had been the growth of the Latin power, mainly through the defeat of the Etruscans, that neither at the death of Aeneas nor during the regency of Lavinia No, during the immature years of the reign of Ascanius did either Mezentius and the Etruscans or any other of their neighbors venture to attack them. When terms of peace were being arranged, the river Albula, now called the Tiber, had been fixed as the boundary between the Etruscans and the Latins. Ascanius was succeeded by his son Silvius, who by some chance had been born in the forest. He became the father of Aeneas Silvius, who in his turn had a son, Latinus Silvius. He planted a number of colonies. The colonies were called Prisci Latini. The cognomen of Silvius was common to all the remaining kings of Alba, each of whom succeeded his father. Their names are Alba, Attis, Capis, Capitus, Tiberinus, who was drowned in crossing the Albula, and his name transferred to the river, which became henceforth the famous Tiber. Then came his son Agrippa, after him his son Romulus Silvius. He was struck by lightning and left the crown to his son Aventinus, whose shrine was on the hill which bear his name and is now a part of the city of Rome. He was succeeded by Proca, who had two sons, Numitor and Amulius. To Numitor the elder he bequeathed the ancient throne of the Sylvian house. Violence, however, proved stronger than either the father's will or the respect due to the brother's seniority, for Amulius expelled his brother and seized the crown. Adding crime to crime, he murdered his brother's son and made the daughter, Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, thus, under the presence of honor in her, depriving her of all hopes of issue. But the fates had, I believe, already decreed the origin of this great city and the foundation of the mightiest empire under heaven. The Vestal was forcibly violated and gave birth to twins. She named Mars as their father, either because she really believed it or because the fault might appear less heinous of a deity were the cause of it. If a deity were the cause of it, but neither gods nor men sheltered her or her babies from the king's cruelty. The priestess was thrown into prison. The boys were ordered to be thrown into the river. By a heaven sent chance, it happened that the Tiber was then overflowing its bank, and stretches of standing water prevented any approach to the main channel. Those who were carrying the children expected that this stagnant water would be sufficient to drown them. So, under the impression that they were carrying out the king's orders, they exposed the boys at the nearest point of the overflow, where the Fiscus Ruminalis, said to have been formerly called Rumularis, now stands. The locality was then a wild solitude. The tradition goes on to say that after the floating cradle in which the boys had been exposed had been left by the retreating water on dry land, a thirsty she-wolf from the surrounding hills, attracted by the crying of the children, came to them, give them her teats to suck, and was so gentle towards them that the king flock master found her licking the boys with her tongue. According to the story, his name was Faustulus. He took the children to his hut and gave them to his wife Laurentia to bring up. Some writers think that Laurentia, from her unchaste life, had got the nickname of she-wolf amongst the shepherds, and that this was the origin of the marvelous story. As soon as the boys, thus born and thus brought up, grew to be young men, they did not neglect their pastoral duties, but their special delight was roaming through the woods on hunting expeditions. As their strength and courage were thus developed, They used not only to lie in wait for fierce beasts of prey, but they even attacked brigands which loaded with plunder. They distributed what they took amongst the shepherds, with whom, surrounded by a continually increasing body of young men, they associated themselves in their serious undertakings and in their sports and pastimes. It is said that the festival of Lupercalia, which is still observed, was even in those days celebrated on the Palatine Hill. This hill was originally called Pallantium, from a city of the same name in Arcadia. The name was afterwards changed to Palatium. Evander, an Arcadian, had held that territory many years before and had introduced an annual festival from Arcadia in which young men ran about naked for sports and wantonness in honor of the Lycian Pan, whom the Romans afterwards called Enos. The existence of this festival was widely recognized, and it was while the two brothers were engaged in it that the brigands, enraged at losing their plunder, ambushed them. Romulus successfully defended himself, but Remus was taken prisoner and brought before Amulius, his captors impudently accusing him of their own crimes. The principal charge brought against them was that of invading Numitor's land with a body of young men whom they had got together and carrying off plunders as though in regular warfare. Remus accordingly was handed over to Numitor for punishment. Faustulus had from the beginning suspected that it was royal offspring that he was bringing up, for he was aware that the boys had been exposed at the king's command, and the time at which he had taken them away exactly corresponded with that of their exposure. He had, however, refused to divulge the matter prematurely until either fitting opportunity occurred or necessity demanded its disclosure. The necessity came first. Alarmed for the safety of Remus, he revealed the state of the case of Romulus. It so happened that Numitor also, who had Remus in his custody, on hearing that he and his brother were twins, and comparing their ages and the character and bearing so unlike that of one in a servile condition, began to recall the memory of his grandchildren. And further inquiries brought him to the same conclusion as Faustulus. Nothing was wanting to the recognition of Remus. So the king Amulius was being enmeshed on all sides by hostile purposes. Romulus shrunk from a direct attack with his body of shepherds, for he was no match for the king in open fight. They were instructed to approach the palace by different routes and meet there at a given time, whilst the Numitor's house, Remus, lent his assistance with a second band he had collected. The attack succeeded and the king was killed. At the beginning of the fray, Numitor gave out that an enemy had entered the city and was attacking the palace in order to draw off the Alban soldiery to the citadel to defend it. When he saw the young men coming to congratulate him after the assassination, he had once called a council of his people and explained his brother's infamous conduct towards him, the story of the grandsons, their parentage and bringing up, and how he recognized them. Then he proceeded to inform them of the tyrant's death and his responsibility for it. The young men marched in order through the midst of the assembly and saluted their grandfather as king. Their action was approved by the whole population, who with one voice ratified the title and sovereignty of the king. After the government of Alba was thus transferred to Numitor, Romulus and Remus were seized with the desire of building a city in the locality where they had been exposed. There was the superfluous population of the Alban and Latin towns. To these were added the shepherds. It was natural to hope that with all these Alba would be small and Lavinium small in comparison with the city which was to be founded. These pleasant anticipations were disturbed by the ancestral curse, ambition which led to a deplorable quarrel over what was at first a trivial matter. As they were twins and no claim to precedence could be based on seniority, they decided to consult the tutelary deities of the place by means of augury as to who was to give his name to the new city and who was to rule it after it had been founded. Romulus accordingly selected the Palatine as his station for observation. Remus the Aventine. Remus is said to have being the first to receive an omen. Six vultures appeared to him. The augury had just been announced to Romulus. When double the number appeared to him, each was saluted as king by his own party. The one side based their claim on the priority of the appearance, the other on the number of the birds. Then followed an angry altercation. Heated passions led to bloodshed. In the tumult, Remus was killed. The more common report is that Remus contemptuously jumped over the newly raised walls and was forthwith killed by the enraged Romulus, who exclaimed, "So shall it be henceforth with everyone who leaps over my walls." Romulus thus became sole ruler, and the city was called after him, its founder. His first work was to fortify the Palatine Hill where he had been brought up. The worship of the other deities he conducted according to the use of Alba, but that of Hercules in accordance with the Greek rite, as they had been instituted by Evander. It was into this neighborhood, according to the tradition, that Hercules, after he had killed Geryon, drove his oxen, which were of marvelous beauty. He swam across the Tiber, driving the oxen before him, and wearied with his journey, lay down in a grassy place near the river to rest himself and the oxen, who enjoyed a rich pasture. When sleep had overtaken him, as he was heavy with food and wine, a shepherd living near, called Cacus, presuming on his strength and captivated by the beauty of the oxen, determined to secure them. If he drove them before him into the cave, their hoof marks would have led their owner on his search for them in the same direction, so he dragged the finest of them backwards by their tails into the cave. At the first streak of dawn, Hercules awoke, and on surveying his herd, saw that some were missing. He proceeded towards the nearest cave to see if any tracks pointed in that direction, but he found that every hoof marked from the cave and none towards it. Perplexed and bewildered, he began to drive the herd away from so dangerous a neighborhood. Some of the cattle missing, those which were left behind, load lowered as they often do, and an answering low sounded from the cave. Hercules turned in that direction as Cacus tried to prevent him by force from entering the cave. He was killed by a blow from Hercules' club after vainly appealing for help to his comrades. The king of the country at the time was Evander, a refugee from Peloponnesus, who ruled more by personal ascendancy than by the exercise of power. He was looked up to with reverence for his knowledge of letters, a new and marvelous thing for uncivilized men, but he was still more revered because of his mother Commenta, who was believed to be a divine being and regarded with wonder by all as an interpreter of fate. In the days before the arrival of Sibyl in Italy, this evander, alarmed by the crowd of excited shepherds standing around a stranger whom they accused of open murder, ascertained from them the nature of his act and what led to it. As he observed the bearing and stature of the man to be more than human in greatness and august dignity, he asked who he was. When he heard his name and learnt his father and his country, said, Hercules, son of Jupiter, hail, my mother, who speaks truth in the name of the gods, has prophesied that thou shalt join the company of the gods, and that here a shrine shall be dedicated to thee, which in ages to come the most powerful nation in the world shall call the Ara Maxima and honor, with a shrine own special worship. Hercules grasped Evander's right hand and said that he took the omen to himself and would fulfill the prophecy by building and consecrating the altar. Then a heifer of conspicuous beauty was taken from the herd, and the first sacrifice was offered. The Pontitati and Pinari, the two principal families in those parts, were invited by Hercules to assist in the sacrifice and at the feast which followed. It so happened that the Pontitati were present at the appointed time, and the entrails were placed before them. The Pinari arrived after these were consumed and came in for the rest of the banquet. It became a permanent institution from that time that as long as the family of the Pinari survived, they should not eat of the entrails of the victims. The Potitati, after being instructed by Evander, presided over that rite for many ages until they handed over this ministerial office to public servants, after which the whole race of the Pontificate perished. This, out of all foreign rites, was the only one which Romulus adopted, as though he felt that all immorality won through courage, of which this was the memorial, would one day be his own reward.